Oh, don't eat it! Hey! What are you doing? Mike, you
Mike Hall became a prominent figure through his hobby of restoring abandoned old classic cars in their local community in British Columbia, Canada, and is why his reality television show called Rust Valley Restorers became successful. His main goal is to turn his yard of hundreds of piles of metal rust into millions of dollars while he still can. After the series was launched in 2018, it provided viewers with amazing transformations of rust buckets into shiny vintage cars that average folks could afford to own. He turned his hobby into profit by eventually starting to auction his collection, which added to millions of dollars in his net worth. There's actually little information on Mike's background, whether it's due to him protecting his family's privacy or that he lived quite an ordinary, uninteresting life before he became a reality TV star. Almost nothing can be found about Mike Hall. During an interview back in December 2019, Mike said that he was 62 years old, born in St. Boniface, Manitoba, Canada, but soon after, his family moved to Kamloops in British Columbia because of his father's new job with Canadian Pacific Rail. His interest in everything mechanical and construction came early, as he watched his father tinkering in their garage and eventually found himself learning how machines worked in general. When he finished school, he soon moved out and started his own company called Chimera Springs Rockworks Limited, a slope stabilization business which, as the name suggests, primarily provides services to any individual or company that needs the expertise of stabilizing unstable slopes. For instance, they were the people to call whenever there were infrastructure projects with steep slopes along the roads that had to be controlled. He was quite proficient in drilling, rock scaling, and blowing up huge chunks of rocks when necessary, and his business was quite successful, helping to provide a comfortable lifestyle for his family. Most of Mike's fans didn't realize that his first foray into reality TV had been in 2017, when he made an appearance as the dynamite-blowing expert in Highway Through Hell, a TV series about heavy rescue truck operators who made sure that the Coquihalla Highway in British Columbia remained clear of any obstruction from vehicular accidents or Mother Nature's glacial temper. In one episode, a huge ice storm hit Fraser Canyon, and afterwards, danger remained as large loosened boulders continued to fall down on the road. Mike, who was described as a blasting contractor at the time, was called in. He said that the more freeze-thaw cycles that the mountain went through, the more the rocks were loosened and started to move as the groundwater affected them. He expertly blew up one huge boulder into small pieces in the middle of the highway without any incidents. His blasting expertise was the reason he earned the nickname Rasta Blasta. So how did Mike Hall get his own reality TV show? Mike was a known classic car collector in the local community, situated in a remote part of British Columbia. Against better judgment, he collected more than 400 classic cars by the time he'd hit 50. He'd been encouraged by his family to sell while he still could, and after rejecting the idea many times, he finally gave in. In 2016, he advertised that he was selling not only the cars, but also the huge property where his cars were stored. There were no takers, so a year later he tried selling it again, but at a higher price. Since it was featured in the news and went viral, it garnered the interest of many people, including Matt Shuchuk, one of the producers of Mayhem Entertainment. With Mike's overall physical look of long dreads and hippie vibe, accompanied by a quirky personality, the TV producer knew that Mike was a perfect fit for a reality TV show. And it didn't take long for them to reach an agreement. It was hard for Mike to part with his collection because he felt that those cars were his legacy. However, he knew that at his age he was already running out of time to restore all of them. His solution was to open up a car restoration shop called Rust Brothers with his son Connor and longtime friend Avery. The aim was to turn his hobby into profit. While there were already many auto restoration TV shows around, the main difference with this show was that Mike's crew restored cars that the average person could afford. He knew that it was quite difficult to earn money with that kind of perspective, so he asked for help from his friends and colleagues in their town, who were just as car crazy as he was. His place of business and junkyard, which he called the Field of Dreams, was situated somewhere between the Rocky Mountains and the desert. It was called Rust Valley, hence the title of the show, Rust Valley Restorers. Mayhem Entertainment and Big Time Decent Productions co-produced the TV series in association with Chorus Studios, and Rust Valley Restorers made its TV debut on 6 December 2018. The first season consisted of 8 episodes, and which captured the attention of so many viewers in Canada that it became one of the top 5 reality TV series aired on History Channel. As its popularity grew, the executive producer made the series accessible worldwide by making it possible for anyone to watch it at any time zone through the biggest streaming network, Netflix. Aside from being commercially successful, the series also gained a nomination for Canadian Screen Awards for Best Direction in a Documentary or Factual Series in 2018. The TV show continued to regale its viewers with more car restoration projects in its subsequent seasons. Its latest season, the 4th, was aired from 24 February up to 23 June 2022. The dry air in Rust Valley helps in preserving the classic cars in the junkyard, and was the reason why the place became a center of the classic car culture in Canada. While Mike was reluctant to part with his cars, he was big on restoring them, and it wasn't just a hobby, but a passion. Here are some of the most interesting car restoration projects they did in the show. During the first episode, while Mike, Avery, and Connor were sorting out which cars in his collection were to be restored, a man named Mike Polton, with his wife and kids, came driving an iconic Lincoln Continental, a 1966 ragtop that would forever be known as the car that U.S. President John F. Kennedy was riding in the day he was assassinated. Back in the late 1960s, a convertible was worth around $6,000, which was the amount that an average family made in a year at that time. It was the client's dream for quite some time to have it restored, and played a major part in his life. Apparently, he'd had a skiing accident, and while he could still drive after his long rehab, he still went around in a wheelchair. He said that it was a car that gave him that little spark to live again. Mike wanted to give this client his dream car, and they agreed on a price that was too low for the repair hours and materials they needed. They discovered more problems with the car, and to lower the expenses, he called in favors from friends. In the end, they restored the 1966 Lincoln Continental ragtop to its former glory. Everybody loves a Mustang, and Mike chose a 1966 Mustang to restore, as he said, Rustang to Mustang, and sell, since he said the one in their yard was something they'd started restoring years ago. The 1966 version was the first of the pony cars, which meant that it was small and affordable. The design and performance catered to the younger generation at that time. Most of the spare parts were cheap. The Mustang was sold at $2,500 back then. Connor then realized that the specific Mustang they were about to work on was the one promised to him by his father when he was still a kid. It was supposed to be a gift for his graduation after they restored it. Most of the parts that they needed for the restorations were stored in the containers that Mike had in his yard. He'd bought them over the years, including doors, fenders, and hoods. Most of them were brand new, but he forgot where he'd placed them. They installed a 5-liter engine so that it could look like a discreet muscle car. They put on new doors, new fenders, taillights, and interior, but no luck with the matching hood. So Mike went shopping in another junkyard and found the perfect match. They initially had problems with the fuel-injected engine, but in the end they made it work. Mike fulfilled his promise to Connor as he finished building it, as father and son did the test drive happily. Mike saying that he wasn't there much when his son was growing up, and he felt good that somehow he made it up to him by doing this car restoration together. Mike accepted a job to finish what a client had been working on since he was in his teens. Many people had a hand in rebuilding what seemed to be a 1938 International Harvester, a pickup truck manufactured by J.P. Morgan, which specialized in farming and commercial vehicles. It didn't last long in the business because the production costs were way higher than the 3 big car manufacturers. Eventually, America lost its independent light truck maker, and it was such a loss since it was designed uniquely with large grills and pontoon-style fenders. When the crew inspected it thoroughly, they called it Frankentruck, as it had been partly rebuilt but with mismatched parts. They had a Chevy front end, a whole S10 frame, and a Ford motor. Someone called it an absolute nightmare for them, as it had been modified such that the doors didn't fit the body of the truck. However, they needed the cash flow, and Mike never thought that it was that bad when he accepted the job. When they were trying to fix it, the welder found that the chassis was spliced, and whoever worked on it in the past never bothered to fix it up safely. They all agreed that they wouldn't even drive it on the road because it was unsafe. Another thing they had to deal with was that it hadn't been cleared by an inspector to be driven on the road, as it was built from scratch. The client was notified of the new problems and was amenable to the changes in the budget. Mike's crew fixed everything so it could pass inspection, because that was his main priority. He didn't want any cars leaving his garage to be unsafe on the road. Fortunately, it passed inspection, and so the Rust Brothers crew pranked the client with the help of his wife and friends. Mike called the client and told him that they discovered new problems, but when he arrived at the shop, it was for the big reveal of his newly restored, shiny 1938 Harvester. He was floored. Mike Hall is stingy when it comes to sharing details of his personal life, and reporters respected it. He would slip up now and then with things such as claiming that his wife used to get crazy with his increasing collection of classic cars on his 26-acre farm property. It probably meant that his wife didn't share his love for the cars, or that she felt it was just a bunch of rust buckets filling up the space, destroying the view of the landscape. Other than that, there was never any mention of his wife in the reality TV show. His son never made any reference to his mother, even just in passing. Whether they were still together or separated, no one had any idea at all. There were indications that Mike had other children aside from Connor, but they weren't mentioned. Even on Connor's social media accounts, he never posted anything about other members of his family, except for his wife, Jada. It was quite obvious that it was done intentionally. However, one of the episodes in the first season featured the wedding of one of the Rust Brothers crew members named Greg. When Mike and Avery were bantering after the wedding, the former said, "Weddings are a big deal. That's why I never got married." Fans were kind of confused about his current status, but some said he probably considered his girlfriend as his wife, but they were never married, or that he could have just said that in jest. According to authoritative sources, Mike's net worth is estimated to be close to $5 million as of February 2023. Most of Mike's fortune came from his blasting and slope stabilization contracts over the years, which was spent buying those rusted classic cars, which by 2022 were about 600 pieces. In the fourth season of Rust Valley Restorers, Connor posted a video on Instagram of their place and said that the 5-acre property was already sold. He never shared for how much, but in 2017, the selling price was $1.5 million. By 2022, it could be assumed that the value had increased as real estate properties continued to rise at unprecedented rates due to the re-emerging economy after the pandemic eased. He announced that all of the cars in the Field of Dreams were also for sale. At that time, they only had 6 months to sell the cars before the new owner of the land took over. If they weren't sold by that time, the cars would go under the crusher. Mike said that he was finally convinced to give it another go. He'd already reached an elderly age, had just received his first senior citizen check, and wanted to make financial arrangements for his loved ones. The final episode of the fourth season of Rust Valley Restorers featured the auction of all of Mike's cars in his junkyard. Many people came to either just look at the classic cars or bid for those that went on the auction block. Aside from those who went there physically, 700 online bidders participated in the auction. Initially, Mike didn't want to be there and was having a panic attack, but Connor and Avery convinced him so that he could properly say goodbye to them. At the end of the auction, Mike learned that he'd made around $750,000 in just one day of selling. He kept about 60 cars from his collection, but before the season ended, a delivery arrived as Mike bought another abandoned classic car to add to his collection. Fans can't wait for the 5th season of the show to air, as it was hinted by Avery that Mike would probably start a new collection again in a new property.
Muhammad Ali. He's
sting like a bee.
Mike just bought another
You
car.
got another one? I think last count, he got 75 of them.
Thank you for spending some time with us. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another video. We also handpick these videos which we recommend you watch next. You can talk to us on all social medias or ask a question in the comments below. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you back tomorrow.